Her billionaire husband lost his memory. Her love brought him back. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes empty of recognition. "Do I know you?" And just like that, Scarlet became a widow to a man who was still breathing. She watched the man she'd loved for 20 years look at her like a stranger, and realized the cruelest thing in the world isn't being forgotten. It's being remembered by everyone else but him. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're tuned in and ready to dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So, let's get started. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Scarlet Joanna sat in the corner of the hospital waiting room, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup that had long stopped offering warmth. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with sterile indifference. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her eyes were raw, her throat tight, and somewhere deep in her chest, a kind of grief was settling that she didn't yet have words for. Across from her, a television murmured the evening news. Something about stocks, markets, numbers that used to matter to George. She closed her eyes and saw him the way he'd been 3 days ago, smiling at her over breakfast, teasing her about burning the toast again, kissing her forehead before heading out the door. He'd told her he loved her. She'd said it back without thinking, the way you do when you've said it 1,000 times before. She didn't know it would be the last time he'd remember saying it. The accident had happened on the highway. A truck. A moment of distraction. Metal folding like paper. By the time the paramedics pulled him out, he was unconscious, his head bleeding, his body bruised but miraculously intact. The doctors said he was lucky. Scarlet didn't feel lucky. "Mrs. Harrington?" She looked up. Dr. Patel stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. She'd learned to read that look over the past 2 days, the kind of professionalism that meant bad news delivered gently. She stood, her legs unsteady. "Is he awake?" "He is." Dr. Patel gestured for her to follow him down the hallway. "But I need to prepare you for what you're about to see." Her heart lurched. "What do you mean?" "Physically, George is recovering well. But the head trauma..." He paused outside a closed door. "He's experiencing retrograde amnesia. It's extensive." Scarlet's breath caught. "How extensive?" "He doesn't remember the accident. He doesn't remember the last several years." Dr. Patel's voice softened. "Mrs. Harrington, he doesn't remember you." The words hit her like a fist to the sternum. "What do you mean he doesn't remember me?" Her voice cracked. "We've been married for 15 years. We've known each other since we were kids. Memory is complicated," Dr. Patel said gently. "The brain is trying to protect itself. It's possible his memory will return, but there's no guarantee. And no timeline." Scarlet stared at the door. Behind it was the man she loved. The man who'd held her through her mother's funeral. The man who knew she hated thunderstorms and loved terrible rom-coms and cried every time she heard their wedding song. And he didn't know her. "Can I see him?" she whispered. Dr. Patel nodded and opened the door. George Harrington sat upright in the hospital bed, his left arm in a sling, a white bandage wrapped around his head. He looked older somehow, not in years but in the way trauma ages a person. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the room with wary focus. When Scarlet stepped inside, his gaze landed on her. There was no recognition, no words, just polite confusion. "Hello," he said slowly, his voice hoarse. Scarlet's knees nearly buckled. She forced herself to smile, even as her vision blurred. Dr. Patel stepped forward. "George, this is Scarlet. Your wife." George blinked. His eyes moved over her face, searching for something that wasn't there. "My wife," he repeated, like he was testing the weight of the word. "Yes." Scarlet's voice was barely audible. We've been married for 15 years. He stared at her. Then, quietly, almost apologetically, he said, I'm sorry. I don't remember you. And just like that, Scarlet's world collapsed. What do you think happens when the person who knows you best becomes a stranger? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The drive home was silent. George sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the city blurred past. He didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the familiar streets or the route they'd taken 1,000 times before. Just watched, silent and unreachable. Scarlet gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, her knuckles white. She wanted to fill the silence with stories, with memories, with anything that might spark something in him. But Dr. Patel's words echoed in her mind. Don't push. Let him come to it naturally. So she said nothing. When they pulled up to the estate, a sprawling modern mansion perched on the hillside with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stretched for miles, George's jaw tightened. This is where we live? He asked. Yes. Scarlet killed the engine. For the past 12 years. He let out a slow breath, his gaze moving over the stone facade, the manicured gardens, the fountain in the circular driveway. It doesn't feel like mine. Scarlet's throat constricted. It will. Give it time. She climbed out and walked around to his side, opening the door for him. George stepped out slowly, favoring his injured arm, and stood at the base of the steps leading up to the entrance. He looked so lost. Come on, she said gently. Let's go inside. The house was exactly as they'd left it 3 days ago. Scarlet had asked the staff not to touch anything. She wanted it to feel normal, lived in. But as George stepped into the grand foyer, his expression didn't change. No flicker of recognition. No worms. He looked around like he was touring a museum. This way, Scarlet said, leading him through the open-concept living room, past the kitchen with its marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, and up the curved staircase to the second floor. She opened the door to their bedroom. The king-sized bed was still unmade from the morning of the accident. Her book sat on the nightstand beside a half-empty glass of water. His watch, the one she'd given him for their 10th anniversary, rested on his dresser. George stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning every detail. He walked to the dresser and picked up the watch, turning it over in his hands. You gave this to me? He asked. Yes. Scarlet stayed near the doorway, afraid to crowd him. 10 years ago, you wore it every day. He set it down carefully like it was made of glass. Then he turned to face her, and for the first time since the hospital, his expression softened, just slightly. Scarlet, he said quietly, testing her name on his tongue. That's a beautiful name. Her heart cracked open. Thank you. He hesitated, then gestured to the bed. We sleep here? Together? Yes. He nodded slowly, processing. And we're happy? Scarlet's eyes burned. She wanted to scream yes, to show him every photo album, every love letter, every piece of evidence that they'd built a life worth remembering. But the look on his face, guarded, uncertain, stopped her. We were, she said softly. We are. George looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the struggle behind his eyes, the desire to believe her warring with the emptiness in his mind. I'm sorry, he said finally. I wish I could feel it. I just don't. Scarlet nodded, her vision blurring. I know. He turned back to the window, his shoulders tense, and Scarlet quietly slipped out of the room. She made it to the bathroom down the hall before the sob broke free. She pressed her hand over her mouth, sinking to the floor, and wept for the man who was alive but gone, for the marriage that existed in only one person's memory, for the love that suddenly felt like a story she'd made up. The cruelest part wasn't that he'd forgotten her. It was that he was trying, and it still wasn't enough. The next morning, Scarlet woke to an empty bed. She sat up, her heart racing, and listened. Silence. She pulled on a robe and padded downstairs, finding George in his study. A room he'd spent countless hours in before the accident, working late into the night, building his empire. Now, he sat at the desk with a stack of files spread out in front of him, his brow furrowed in concentration. "George?" she said softly from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "Oh, good morning. What are you doing?" "Trying to understand." He gestured at the papers, business reports, contracts, financial statements. "They told me I run a company. I figured I should, I don't know, learn who I was." Scarlet's chest tightened. Who I was, past tense. Like that person was dead. "You don't have to do this now," she said. "You're still recovering. I need to do something." His voice was sharper than he intended. He softened it. "I can't just sit around waiting for memories that might never come." She nodded, swallowing the hurt. "Okay, I'll make breakfast." "I'm not hungry." "George." "Scarlet." He set down the file, his jaw tight. "I appreciate what you're doing. I do. But I need space to figure this out. On my own." The words hit her like a slap. "Right?" she whispered. "Of course." She turned and walked away before he could see her face crumble. "Right?" she whispered. "Of course." She turned and walked away before he could see her face crumble. By afternoon, George's mother arrived. Victoria Harrington was a tall, elegant woman in her late 60s, draped in designer clothing and cold disapproval. She swept into the house without knocking, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Where is he?" she demanded. Scarlet gestured toward the study. "He's been in there all morning." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "And you've just left him alone?" "He asked for space." "Of course he did. He doesn't know you." Victoria's tone was sharp, surgical. "You're a stranger to him now, Scarlet. Perhaps it's time you accepted that." Scarlet's hands curled into fists. "He's my husband. He's my son. And I won't stand by while you cling to a fantasy." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "George built an empire. He doesn't need sentiment. He needs clarity. And if you truly loved him, you'd let him go." Before Scarlet could respond, George appeared in the hallway. "Mom!" Victoria's expression shifted instantly, warmth flooding her features. "George, darling." She crossed to him, cupping his face. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," he admitted. "But, okay, I think." Victoria glanced back at Scarlet, her message clear. Then she linked her arm through George's. "Come. Let's talk. You and I." George hesitated, his gaze flickering to Scarlet. For a moment, she thought he might protest. But then he nodded and let his mother lead him away. That night, George didn't come to bed. Scarlet lay alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying Victoria's words over and over. "You're clinging to a fantasy." Was she? Maybe George was right. Maybe the man she loved was gone, and she was mourning someone who no longer existed. Maybe the kindest thing she could do was let him build a new life, without her in it. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her best friend. "Maya, how are you holding up?" Scarlet stared at the message, tears sliding down her temples. She didn't know how to answer, because the truth was unbearable. She was losing him, not to death or distance, but to the slow, suffocating erasure of everything they'd built. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Downstairs, George sat alone in the study, staring at a framed photo on the desk. Him and Scarlet on their wedding day, her head on his shoulder, both of them laughing. He didn't remember it, didn't remember her. but something about the photo made his chest ache. "Who were you?" he whispered to the man in the picture. "And why does it feel like I'm supposed to miss you?" The storm came without warning. It started as distant thunder around dinner time, then escalated into a full-blown tempest by nightfall. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howled through the trees, and then, with a sharp crack and a hum that died into silence, the power went out. Scarlet was in the kitchen when it happened, fumbling in the dark for her phone. The backup generator should have kicked in, but nothing happened. She heard footsteps behind her. "Scarlet." George stood in the doorway, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light from her phone screen. "The power's out," she said unnecessarily. "The generator must have failed. I'll call someone in the morning, but for now." She trailed off, opening a drawer and pulling out candles and matches. "Can I help?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprised. "Sure." There are more candles in the living room, top shelf of the bookcase. They worked in silence, lighting candles and placing them around the main floor. The flickering light cast soft shadows across the walls, transforming the sprawling modern house into something smaller, more intimate. Scarlet found blankets in the hallway closet and brought them to the living room, where the fireplace still held embers from earlier. George knelt beside it, carefully adding logs until flames began to lick upward. "You know how to do that?" Scarlet asked, settling onto the couch. He shrugged. "Instinct, I guess. Muscle memory." They sat across from each other, George in the armchair, Scarlet on the couch, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the storm raged on. "This is strange," George said after a while. "What is?" "Being here. With you." He stared into the flames. "Everyone keeps telling me who I was, what I did, how I felt, but none of it connects. It's like reading someone else's biography." Scarlet pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I can't imagine what that's like." "Can't you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You lost someone too. I may be sitting here, but the person you married, he's gone, isn't he?" Her throat tightened. No one had said it out loud before, not even her. "Yes," she whispered. "He is." George leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Tell me about him. Not the business stuff. Not the facts. Tell me something real." Scarlet hesitated. Then quietly she began. "You hated mornings. Always grumpy until you had coffee. But once, on our 5th anniversary, you woke me up at dawn and drove me to the coast just to watch the sunrise. You said some things were worth being tired for." George listened, his expression unreadable. "You had this laugh," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "This ridiculous, loud laugh that embarrassed you. But I loved it, because it meant you were really, truly happy." "And was I?" he asked. "Happy?" Scarlet met his eyes across the firelight. "Yes, we both were." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, "I don't remember you, Scarlet, but I feel something when you talk. I don't know what it is, but it's there." Her heart stuttered. "What does it feel like?" she asked. George looked at her, his face half in shadow, half in light. "Like I'm supposed to know you," he said. "Like forgetting you was the mistake." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. Scarlet woke on the couch, the blanket still wrapped around her. Across the room, George sat in the armchair, awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." She sat up, pushing her hair back. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little." He stood, stretching. "I was thinking, you said we knew each other as kids. Is there somewhere we used to go? Somewhere that mattered?" Scarlet's breath caught. "Yes, There is. An hour later, they stood at the edge of Riverside Park, a small, overgrown stretch of green on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't glamorous. The playground equipment was rusted, the grass patchy. But to Scarlet it was sacred ground. "This is where we met," she said, leading him toward the old oak tree at the far end of the field. "Third grade. You gave me a granola bar and told me about your dog." George followed, his eyes scanning the park like he was searching for something just out of reach. When they reached the tree, Scarlet knelt and brushed away the leaves at its base. Carved into the bark, faded but still visible, were two sets of initials inside a lopsided heart. "J plus SJ. "We did that when we were 12, Scarlet said, tracing the letters with her finger. "You said it would last forever." George crouched beside her, staring at the carving. His hand reached out, hovering over the bark, then pulled back. "Why me?" he asked suddenly. Scarlet looked at him, confused. "What? Why did you stay with me? A kid like that?" He gestured at the initials. "What made him worth it?" Scarlet's eyes stung. She sat back on her heels, her voice quiet. "My father was violent. My mother left when I was 9. I spent most of my childhood afraid. Of going home, of being noticed, of existing too loudly." She swallowed hard. "But you never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. You just saw me. And you stayed." George's jaw tightened. "You were my safe place, George," she whispered. "You still are. Even now." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something crack in his expression. Something raw and unguarded. "I found something," he said quietly. "Last night, in the study." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Scarlet unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, written in George's handwriting, dated 15 years ago. "Scarlet, I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it down. You're the only thing in my life that makes sense. The only person who's ever made me feel like I'm enough. I don't care about money or success or any of it. I just care about you. I'm going to marry you someday, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again. I love you, George." Scarlet's vision blurred. She pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. George watched her, his own eyes red-rimmed. "I don't remember writing that," he said hoarsely. "But I read it 10 times last night. And Scarlet, I felt it. Every word." She looked up at him, hope and heartbreak tangled in her chest. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice breaking. "I want to know. I want to understand who I was, who we were." And for the first time since the accident, Scarlet believed they might find their way back. The days that followed felt like learning to breathe again. Scarlet stopped trying to make George remember. Instead, she simply let him know her. They spent mornings in the kitchen, Scarlet teaching him how she liked her coffee, too much cream, 1 sugar. George attempting to cook breakfast and burning the eggs every time. "I think I'm worse at this than I was before," he said, scraping charred remnants into the trash. Scarlet laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "You were never good at cooking. That's why we had a chef." "We have a chef?" "We had a chef. I sent her on vacation after the accident. I wanted it to be just us." George looked at her, something warm flickering in his eyes. "I'm glad you did." They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Scarlet told him about her favorite books, her irrational fear of birds, the summer she spent volunteering at an animal shelter. George listened, asked questions, and slowly began sharing pieces of himself. Not memories, but feelings. Things he was discovering about who he was now. "I don't think I like being a billionaire," he admitted one afternoon as they walked through the garden. Scarlet raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "It feels cold. All those reports and spreadsheets and people wanting things from me. It doesn't feel like mine. He paused, plucking a leaf from a low-hanging branch. This feels more real. Talking to you. Being here. Scarlet's heart swelled. Then maybe you don't have to go back to all of it. Not right away. He glanced at her. You wouldn't mind? George, I just want you to be happy. Whatever that looks like. One evening, they found themselves in the living room. An old photo album spread across the coffee table. Scarlet had been hesitant to bring it out, afraid it would overwhelm him. But George had asked. They flipped through the pages together. Childhood snapshots, awkward teenage years, their wedding day. You were beautiful, George said softly, staring at a photo of Scarlet in her wedding dress. Were? She teased. He looked up, his cheeks flushing. You are beautiful. The air between them shifted. Scarlet's breath caught. George, dance with me, he said suddenly. What? Dance with me. He stood, offering his hand. No music. No memories. Just this. Scarlet hesitated, then took his hand. He pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers gently. They swayed in the quiet living room, the only sound their breathing and the faint creak of the floorboards. This feels right, George whispered against her hair. I don't know why, but it does. Scarlet closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the moment. For the first time since the accident, she felt like she had him back. Not the old George, but a George. One who was choosing her not because he remembered, but because he wanted to. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. His gaze dropped to her lips. Scarlet, But then he stopped. His hand fell away. He stepped back, his expression torn. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to kiss you because I should. I want it to mean something. Scarlet's throat tightened, but she nodded. It's okay. I understand. But as she watched him walk away, she realized something that broke her heart all over again. He was falling for her, and he was terrified of it. Have you ever had to start over with someone you thought you'd never lose? Share your story below. Everything fell apart on a Tuesday. George's business partner, Marcus Webb, arrived unannounced, his expression grim and his briefcase heavy with urgency. Scarlet answered the door, dread pooling in her stomach the moment she saw him. I need to speak with George, Marcus said. It's critical. She led him to the study, where George had been reading, something he'd taken to doing in the afternoons, reclaiming pieces of himself through books instead of memories. Marcus, George said, standing. What's wrong? Marcus didn't waste time. He spread contracts and financial reports across the desk, his finger jabbing at red-highlighted numbers. The Singapore deal is collapsing. Without your signature and your presence at the negotiation table, we're about to lose $40 million and 3 years of work. Marcus looked up, his eyes hard. George, I know you're recovering, but the company is bleeding. We need you, the real you, not this. George's jaw tightened. I'm doing the best I can. It's not enough. Marcus softened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but you built this empire. You were ruthless, focused, strategic. Right now, you're distracted. Distracted. George's voice dropped dangerously low. Marcus glanced toward the door where Scarlet stood. You're playing house with a woman you don't remember instead of focusing on what actually matters. Your legacy, your company, your future. Scarlet's breath caught. She turned to leave, but George's voice stopped her. Scarlet, wait. It's fine, she said quietly, not turning around. He's right. You have responsibilities. She walked away before either of them could respond. For the next 3 hours, Marcus drilled George on contracts, strategies, and decisions that needed to be made. And with every passing minute, George felt himself slipping back into a version of himself he didn't recognize. Cold, calculating, detached. When Marcus finally left, George sat alone in the study, staring at the stack of papers. "This is who you were," a voice in his head whispered. "This is what mattered." And for the first time since the accident, he wondered if Scarlet had fallen in love with someone he could never be again. He found her in the bedroom, packing a small suitcase. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharper than he intended. "Giving you space." She didn't look at him, folding a sweater with shaking hands. "You need to focus on your company, on your life. I've been selfish, trying to keep you here when you have so much else to deal with, Scarlet. I've been invisible to you twice now, George." Her voice cracked. "Once when you forgot me, and now when you're remembering who you're supposed to be." She finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I can't compete with that. I won't. You think I want this?" George gestured angrily toward the study. "You think I want to be the man Marcus described? Cold and ruthless and—" "It's who you were," Scarlet interrupted. "And maybe it's who you need to be again." "What if I don't want to be him?" George's voice broke. "What if I want to be someone different? Someone who deserves you?" "But you don't remember deserving me," Scarlet shouted, her composure finally shattering. "You don't remember choosing me, and I can't keep pretending that what we've built over the last few weeks is the same as 15 years of love. It's not fair to either of us." She zipped the suitcase and picked it up. "Where are you going?" George asked, his voice hollow. "To Maya's. Just for a while. So you can think. So we both can." She walked past him, and this time, he didn't stop her. The front door closed with a soft click that echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. George stood in the hallway, alone, and for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, he felt the full weight of what he'd lost. Not his memory, her. 3 days passed in suffocating silence. George threw himself into work, signing contracts, attending virtual meetings, making the decisions Marcus insisted only he could make. He was efficient, focused, exactly the man everyone expected him to be, and he hated every second of it. At night, the house felt cavernous. He'd wander the empty rooms, touching things that should have meant something. Photos, books, the watch she'd given him. But none of it filled the hollowness spreading through his chest. On the 4th night, he found himself in Scarlet's closet. Her clothes still hung neatly on the racks. Her perfume still sat on the dresser. He picked up the bottle and inhaled jasmine and vanilla. The scent triggered something, not a memory, but a feeling. Safety. Home. He set it down and noticed a leather journal on the shelf, partially hidden behind shoeboxes. He hesitated, then opened it. June 14th. George worked late again tonight. "I know he's stressed about the merger, but I miss him. I miss us. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers that we're supposed to be partners, not just people who share a house." But then he came home at midnight with takeout from that terrible Chinese place we loved in college. And we ate it cold on the kitchen floor, laughing about nothing. And I remembered why I love him. He always comes back to me. September 3rd. His mother said something cruel today. She always does. But George defended me. He told her that I'm the best thing that ever happened to him. And if she can't respect that, she's not welcome in our home. I cried after she left. Not because of her words, but because of his. Because even after all these years, he still chooses me. March 22nd. I'm scared. George has been so distant lately, buried in work, and I feel myself disappearing. I left his favorite meal on the table tonight and went to bed early. When I woke up, he was lying beside me, and he'd left a note on my pillow. "I'm sorry. I see you. I'll always see you." He doesn't know how much I needed that. George read every entry. Years of her thoughts, her fears, her love. And with each page, he understood something he'd been too afraid to admit. She hadn't fallen in love with the billionaire. She'd fallen in love with the boy who saw her, who chose her, who came back to her again and again no matter what. And that boy was still here. He just needed to choose her too. George grabbed his jacket and keys, his heart pounding. Rain was falling again, heavy and cold, but he didn't care. He drove across the city to Maya's apartment, his hands shaking on the wheel. When he knocked on the door, it was Scarlet who answered. She looked exhausted, beautiful, heartbroken. "George." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" He was soaking wet, breathless, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I read your journal. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. And Scarlet, I don't remember falling in love with you." His voice cracked. "But I know I'm doing it now, right now. Every single day since I woke up." She stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't care about the company," he continued. "I don't care about who I was or what I'm supposed to be. I care about you. I care about the way you laugh at my terrible cooking, and the way you cry during rom-coms, and the way you look at me like I'm worth something, even when I don't remember why. George, I don't want my old life back," he said fiercely. "I want this life, with you, if you'll still have me." Scarlet's tears spilled over. She reached out, touching his rain-soaked face. "You're sure?" she whispered. "You're choosing this? Choosing me?" "I'm choosing you," he said. "Not because I remember, because I know. And I'll keep choosing you. Every single day." She pulled him inside, and for the first time in days, George felt like he could breathe again. They didn't go back to the mansion. Instead, George and Scarlet rented a small apartment downtown. Modest, cozy, nothing like the sprawling estate on the hill. It had creaky floors, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, and a view of the city lights that felt more like home than any luxury ever had. "Are you sure about this?" Scarlet asked on their first morning there, watching George attempt to make coffee in the unfamiliar kitchen. He turned to her, smiling. A real smile, unguarded and warm. "I've never been more sure of anything." They built new routines. Morning walks through the park. Cooking disasters that ended in laughter and takeout. Evenings curled up on the second-hand couch, talking about everything. Their dreams, their fears, who they wanted to become. George stepped back from the company, appointing Marcus as acting CEO while he took time to figure out what he actually wanted. The board protested. His mother called him foolish. He didn't care. "I spent years building an empire I can't even remember," he told Scarlet one night. "Maybe it's time I build something that actually matters." "And what's that?" she asked softly. He took her hand. "A life. With you." 3 months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, George took Scarlet back to Riverside Park. The oak tree stood exactly as it had before, their initials still carved into the bark. But this time, George brought a pocket knife. "What are you doing?" Scarlet asked, watching him kneel at the base of the tree. "Making a new memory," he said. Carefully, he carved a new date beneath the old initials. November 7th, 2025, the day I chose you again. Scarlet's breath hitched. "George!" He stood, brushing the bark dust from his hands, and reached into his jacket pocket. When he turned to face her, he was holding a small velvet box. "I know we're already married," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But I want to do this right. Not because of what a piece of paper says or what anyone expects. Because I choose you, Scarlet. Today. Tomorrow. Every day after." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver band. Nothing like the elaborate diamond ring she'd worn before. "This isn't about reclaiming the past," he continued. It's about building something new. So, Scarlet Joanna Harrington. He dropped to one knee. Will you marry me? Again? Not because I was your husband before, but because I want to be your husband now. And for the rest of my life. Tears streamed down Scarlet's face. She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they stayed there, kneeling in the grass beneath the tree where their story began, holding each other like they'd never let go. What does love mean to you? Is it about holding onto the past or building the future together? Drop your thoughts below, we'd love to hear from you. 6 months later, they stood on a beach at sunrise. Just the two of them, no grand ceremony, no audience. A simple exchange of vows written from the heart. I don't remember the first time I fell in love with you, George said, his voice thick with emotion. But I get to fall in love with you every single day. And that's not a loss. That's a gift. Scarlet smiled through her tears. You taught me that love isn't about being remembered. It's about being seen, being chosen. And George, you see me. You choose me. And that's more than I ever dreamed possible. They kissed as the sun broke over the horizon, bathing them in golden light. And in that moment, they both understood the truth that had been there all along. George had lost his memory, but in losing it, he'd found something far more precious. The courage to love her not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.